So I've helped new dungeon masters hone their craft, but I've left completely new players in the dust? That makes no sense! Time to balance the scale! Welcome to the Attic Dungeon! My name is Sam, and whether it's creating your very first D&D character sheet or rolling your first die that has more than 6 sides, I'm here to help you with everything! So far, all of my videos were aimed at people who knew what they were doing. Even the DM guides kind of assume that you already know the basics of the game. Today, however, I'm here to teach those basics to people who are completely new to the game or have an interest in playing it. I'll cover a few core aspects today, including a short explanation of what Dungeons & Dragons actually is, the core rule of D&D, namely the D20 system, and then we'll have a look at creating your first character. So what is Dungeons & Dragons? In short, it's a tabletop role-playing game. Tabletop means the game is played at a regular table. Role-playing game means you'll probably be playing one character rather than controlling an entire army or a kingdom. And most RPGs invite you to really build your character's personality as well as its skill set. You're not just going to have your fighter aimlessly swing his sword at every orc in sight. You'll also have to figure out how he or she behaves when talking to other people, or what their goals in life are and how they want to attain those goals. You'll be creating a character and you'll make it come to life in a world of endless possibilities. Now, how does the game work? In general, you'll be teaming up with a few other players, each playing as their own character, playing through an adventure that the Dungeon Master has prepared for you. The Dungeon Master, or DM for short, is not a part of the adventuring party, but is instead everything else. They control every other character you encounter, be they good or bad. They guide your party through the entire story, be it segments of combat, bits of exploration, or social encounters. They basically run the world. You decide what your character does and how they react on every occasion. But when your chosen action has a chance to fail, the dice come into play. Dungeons & Dragons is a D20 system game, which means your 20-sided die is going to be your best friend and worst enemy. This die is the one that is going to decide whether you succeed at pickpocketing the noble or are going to get caught in the process. The way it works is that when a task has a chance to fail, you roll the d20 and then you will add or subtract a bonus that reflects how good you are at what you're trying to do. Then you or the DM will compare your total number to the number required to pass the challenge. A simple example: Ulfric, the level 6 halfling fighter, has to climb up a wall. The DM indicates that success will depend on my athletic skill. On my character sheet, it says that I get a +2 bonus to my athletics roll. Ulfric isn't the strongest fellow around, he's more of the nimble type. Anyway, I take my d20 and I roll a 13. I add my +2 bonus and ask the DM if that will be enough to scale the wall without issues. The DM had decided beforehand that I needed a 10 to pass this test, so Ulfric merrily scales the wall. On to the next part of the adventure. Had Ulfric failed the test, he might have fallen down halfway through and taken some damage, but for now he is safe. And that is the basic gist of it. You encounter a problem, you formulate what you are going to do, you roll a die if needed, compare the result to a score you have to achieve to succeed. Usually the DM will do the comparing, seeing as they like to keep the score that you have to attain a secret. Of course, there's quite a few more rules to Dungeons & Dragons than this one, but this one is the basic rule and it will allow you to get started. Now, what do you actually need to play Dungeons & Dragons? The bare minimum that you need is pen, paper, a set of polyhedral dice, they're the fancy ones, that I showed earlier, and access to a copy of the player's handbook, the D&D 5th edition handbook that has all the basic options for player characters. There's a lot of books that add extra options, but if you're just starting out, start with the player handbook, keep it simple, get familiar with the game, and then move on to the extra stuff. Also, you need a group of people to play with, of course. Any number will do, basically. I've heard of 2-man D&D groups, one DMing, one playing one or more characters, going through the adventures, and then there's shows on YouTube that have like 8 people playing at the same time. Someone, of course, needs to be the dungeon master, preferably somebody with a decent understanding of the rules and some experience in the game. Everybody else will be playing their character. So now we're going to have a look at how to create this custom character that you'll be playing. While there are a lot of online tools to help you create one semi-automatically, today I'll be teaching you how to create one from scratch, step by step, using only an empty character sheet. Why am I doing this? It's very simple. If you make a few of these characters yourself, you will have a much greater understanding of the basic rules. You will know which modifier comes from where, what number represents what, and you will have an easier time getting into the game the first time you'll be playing. The first step involves very little paperwork. Indeed, it is more brain work. Thinking of a concept. Who is your character going to be? And this question is more than a simple personality question. At this point, Dungeons & Dragons has 13 unique classes, each divided into subclasses, and there's more races to choose from than you can swing a stick at. So how to choose amongst all these choices? Start very simple. Read the short introduction to each of the classes and see which one sounds fun to play as. Don't delve into the mechanics too deeply yet, just look at the classes, the flavor, the basic idea, and decide whether or not this class is an option for you. If you want to be the greatest magic wielder ever, you're probably not going to be playing a barbarian, rogue, or a fighter. Or if you want to be the toughest cookie to crumble, the squishy mage classes might just not be your fancy. It's the same idea with the races. Think of what type of fantasy race you would like to play at and just take it. Read about it, see which flavor text appeal to you and select from those races. Just try to visualize what you want your character to be able to do and make a selection of class choices, race choices based on that. A small note when it comes to race, don't let other people tell you that you absolutely need to pick a race that adds a bonus to your primary stat, which is the one that your class relies on the most. A lot of people will try to tell you that your primary stat absolutely needs to start at 16 when you're level 1. That is absolutely untrue. 14 is enough to start with, just don't go any lower than 14. The chance that you miss with certain things that you want to do starts to get really high then. But feel free to pick any race that you like. Almost every race will provide some bonus to whatever concept you want to build. You want to be one of the big stereotypes like the elf ranger? Cool, go for it. You want to be something a bit more of the books like a dwarf rogue? Also cool, go for it. So now that we have a character concept which consists out of a class, a race, and some good ideas in your brain, it is time to transform all of those into a workable character sheet. As I said before, we're doing this manually so that you actually know where everything is coming from. Obviously, what you will need to do this yourself is one empty Dungeons & Dragons character sheet. There's the official one. There's loads of fan-made ones, including a few really nice simplified ones for first-time players. I'll put a link to one of those down in the description. I'll be using the normal D&D character sheet to recreate my first 5th edition character that I ever played, Fordin Loudwater, the Hill Dwarf Tempest Clerk. Now that's a lot of words for a level 1 character, and they already kind of entail my concept. So let's explain how I got to it. What was the idea when I started building my character? Step 1. I absolutely love dwarves. So there was no way that my first 5e character was going to be anything else but a dwarf. Why do I like dwarves? For multiple reasons, but one of the main ideas is that I really like the fact that they get a bonus to their constitution. They are extra sturdy. They can stay alive on the battlefield for longer than most of their companions can, and I really value that ability. So I was super happy when I read that one of the sub-races for dwarves, namely the hill dwarf, gets extra hit points per level, so they're able to stay alive for an even longer period of time. So that's my race already sorted out. Then I come to the class. There are a few things that I really value in a good class. One of them is being able to be versatile, and clerics are super versatile. They can heal, they can support, they can do damage, and some of them can also soak a fair amount of damage, which is everything I'm looking for. So a dwarf cleric it was. And then I came to the Tempest subclass, and that is because I absolutely love dealing damage with thunder and lightning in games. There's something very raw, powerful about the primal nature of these two elements, so a Tempest cleric was an easy fit. Clerics are a wisdom-based class, so it was really nice to see that the hill dwarf also gives a bonus to wisdom. But as I said, that's not really necessary, but it just kind of, that's how it came to be once I selected my dwarf. Another reason why I picked a cleric for this demonstration that I'm about to do is because at level 1 they have to make every possible choice there is in the game. Step 1, you have to choose your class, of course, but you already also have to choose a subclass, which is something that most classes do at a later level, but that way you can see how that one works out. And they're a spellcaster, so they need to select spells at level 1 as well, so I can have a look at that with you too. So basically by the end of this demonstration, I will have shown you every possible aspect of creating any D&D character, thanks to clerics being very versatile people. Now here you have it, an empty D&D character sheet. As you can see, I already filled in a few things, namely the name of my character, the class, the race, and my own player name, because hell yes, it's on there as well. The last thing we have to choose before we get into filling all the numbers is our background. In the player handbook, you find a list of many different backgrounds that you can use to tie your character into the world and into the backstory that you're making for it. Equally important, your background gives you a few additional things that you're good at, which are going to be called proficiencies. Usually some skills, maybe some tools. In my case, Fordin used to be a sailor before he became a standalone adventurer. So I fill in sailor into my background, and later on I'll indicate the proficiencies that I gained from it. Then up first, when it comes to all the numbers, are our ability scores. These are very important. They will define a lot of what you can or cannot do. They are, of course, the 6 classic scores of strength, dexterity, which basically means how fast your character is, constitution, how sturdy are they, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. You are going to have to assign values to all of them, and I can already tell you beforehand you will not be equally good at each of them. There are multiple ways of assigning these scores, namely 3, and I'll quickly go over them. The first one is the standard array. You take this pre-made list of ability scores and you assign them to each score as you want. You can obviously use each number only once. The second option is rolling your stats. You take 4 6-sided dice, you roll them 6 times, and each time you drop the lowest one, you write down the number, and then you divide them amongst your ability scores. And then the last one is point by. Point by means that all of your scores start at 8, and you receive 27 points to increase them according to this table until you run out of points. Whichever method you choose, after you've selected which number goes where, you still get to add your racial bonus. In my case, for our dwarf, that will be +2 constitution and +1 wisdom. Personally, I always use point buy. Why? Flexibility. Using the pre-made array is easy, and it's great for new players, I would assume, but it allows for 0 flexibility while building. Maybe I want some stats to be at 14 and drop another one to 8, and those numbers don't allow me to do what I want to do. And while rolling stats can be exciting and fun, for longer campaigns I abhor the randomness of things that it brings. You might start out with superb stats, having rolled 12+ for everything, or your highest stat might be a 12 and everything else will be lower. Yes, there's homebrew rules with rerolls and whatnot, but let's just not. If it doesn't work, don't. I'm fine with using rolls for a one-shot adventure, like one evening, and okay, that's it, but not for longer games. I want my players, and I want myself as a player, to know that we all start at an equal power level and that we can grow however we want afterwards. So, for today as well, we are going to use point buy. It allows us to accentuate our ability scores the way we like it, whether we're going for a few specialized stats or planning on evening them out a bit. I'll bring up the point buy table again somewhere, hopefully here. So the number next to one of the ability scores is the cost to raise it from 8 to that number. So raising a stat from 8 to 14 costs you 7 of your 27 points. Using this system, I have selected the following attribute scores. Before writing these down on the sheet, however, I add my racial bonuses, so a +2 to constitution and a +1 to wisdom, and then we end up with these, which we will now fill in on our character sheet. So from these ability scores, which have now been filled in on my character sheet, as you can see, we are going to derive a few positive and negative modifiers. These modifiers are usually more important than the actual ability score, which is why I put those in the tiny circle, and we're going to put the modifiers into the larger square. The way the modifiers work is pretty simple. For each 2 that an ability score is higher than 10, you get +1. So for strength, which is 14, that would mean I get +2. This also works in the opposite way. Dexterity is too lower than 10, so I get -1. In this way, we will fill out all of our scores. Constitution will be +3, intelligence -1, wisdom +3, and our charisma score, which is at 12, will receive a nice +1 bonus as well. A lot of what comes next, the things that we're going to be filling in, will be based on the 6 positive or negative bonuses and our proficiency modifier. This modifier starts out at +2 for everyone at level 1, and it goes up by 1 every 4 levels. It's added to a roll whenever you are proficient in the skill or with a weapon or the spell. It actually reflects the training that you have received and the experience that you have gained with certain abilities or weapons. That's why it's kind of the same for everyone at each level. So when we jump back to our character sheet, you will notice that I have filled in +2 in the proficiency bonus square. The next thing we'll have a look at are saving throws. What are saving throws? In some of the cases, the dungeon master might ask you to roll a saving throw to see how well you can dodge or resist a certain effect. Maybe a giant boulder is rolling at your party and you have to dive into the bushes, then you would have to roll a dexterity saving throw to see whether or not you make it. Maybe an enemy spellcaster will target you with a mind control spell, and that would mean you'd have to roll a wisdom save to see whether or not you can resist the effects of the spell. How do you define these? Well, it's very straightforward. They are at level 1 exactly the same as your ability score modifier. That means that because my strength is +2, my strength save will also be +2. Dexterity at -1 will again become -1, and then we copy these as well. The last two are a bit of an exception because I am a cleric. I get a bonus to wisdom saves and charisma saves. Every class gets a bonus to 2 saves, but they're all different ones. What does that mean? I get to add this here proficiency bonus to the number. My wisdom, as you can see here, is at +3. Now I get to add the +2 bonus, so that means wisdom will be +5. Charisma, which was at +1, will become a +3. With such a high wisdom spell, of course, mind control spells are no problem for me whatsoever, but that rolling boulder that I described might form issues for my cleric. I might get hit at some point and get damaged quite a bit. You cannot have it all. Now, to indicate that I am proficient with these 2 saves, you can color in the little dot. This is not just to show everybody that you're better at it, but also because, as I explained, your proficiency bonus goes up as you level, and that means these will go up as well. So it's basically so you don't forget to raise those skills. Next up are going to be our skills. These are there to more specifically reflect what you're good or bad at than just the broader ability scores. But defining the numbers again works in the same way as it did for the saving throws. Each skill has a governing ability score. Athletics, for example, is based on your strength score. It's usually written right next to the skill on the character sheet. And there is a possibility that you are proficient in skills again. Yay! If not, your regular ability score modifier will be repeated here. Now, how do you define which skills you are proficient in? It depends on your class. Your class will give you choices from a certain list. For my cleric, for example, I get to select 2 skills from history, insight, medicine, persuasion, and religion. For Fordin, I selected a history because he knows quite a few things from traveling the world as a sailor, and persuasion because I do enjoy having charismatic characters in general. So we are back at our character sheet, and you can see that I already filled in most of my skills. These are all the skills that I am not proficient at. You see quite a few negative modifiers. That is because of my low dexterity and low intelligence. Luckily, the remaining numbers will more than make up for it. I told you that Fordin has quite a bit of knowledge about history, so that means that history, which would be a -1 because of my low intelligence, actually becomes a +1. So skill proficiencies can be a nice way to circumvent your negative modifiers that you have here. The other skill I selected was persuasion, which already was +1 and now becomes +3. You can see there are 2 more skills that I have not yet filled in. These are skills that I will also be proficient at because of my background. I told you that backgrounds bring extra skill proficiencies, and for the sailor, that means I'm very athletic, which means +2 means 4, and Fordin is going to be one of the most perceptive characters out there, starting at +5, and that is our complete skill block done. Next up are 2 very simple things to fill in, namely our initiative and our speed. Initiative helps to decide who gets to go first when combat happens, and it is exactly the same as your dexterity modifier. So in my case, I'm a bit on the slow side. I'll start at -1. Speed, however, is not class dependent, well, not at level 1 at least, but it is race dependent. Most races start with a speed of 30 feet, and if you're using one of them fancy battle maps, that means you can move 6 squares. However, I am a dwarf, and just like other shorter races, my legs don't run as fast, so I only get 25 speed to begin with. If you think, wow, but doesn't that mean you're always slower? Yeah, kind of, but depending on your class, this number might go up. Also, there are racial abilities that I get that compensate for the lower speed that I receive. Now comes the time where you write down all of your features, your languages, and the proficiencies you have with items. Some come from your race, most come from your class, and a few might just come from your background. I'm just going to quickly insert these, so it is magical time-lapse time. Alright, there we are once more on our character sheet. You can see that down here I wrote a lot of things. Basically on the left side there's all the equipment I can use and the languages, and on the right side there's anything I get from being either a hill dwarf or a cleric. So all of that combined in the right block. What we're going to do now is something very important. We're going to define how many hit points we have. Again, the player handbook tells you for each class how much you have. For a cleric, this is 8 plus your constitution modifier, so that would mean 11 for me. But since I am a hill dwarf and one of my racials, I wrote it down here and I already talked to you about it. Dwarven toughness plus 1 HP per level. I am level 1, so I get 1 extra hit point, which is going to bring the total to 12. A bit lower than your HP, you find hit dice. Now, hit dice, it's a tiny bit more complex and I'm not going to talk about it too much today. I'll come back to it in a later episode. Are basically your natural recovery during a day. How much damage can you shrug off on your own without having to take a longer rest or without having to receive any healing magic? For the cleric, all you have to know that you have to write down for now is 1d8. Basically means that once a day you get to roll 1 dice, a d8, to recover some HP. Again, it grows as you level up. We're almost there. Next up is selecting our starting equipment. There's 2 options to do this. The first one is to select your gear from a class-specific list of starting equipment. The other option is to take your starting gold and go shopping. Your starting gold depends on your class. A fighter gets a lot more starting gold than a wizard because he needs to buy a decent weapon, a decent shield, decent armor, and the wizard just needs, I don't know, a book and a stick. But in 90% of the time, it is perfectly acceptable to just select from your starting list of equipment that is bound to your class. This is also going to be where my subclass comes into play. So I'm going to add a small note on subclasses. Every class has multiple subclasses. It's a specialization that you choose somewhere between level 1 and level 3. It provides you a slew of additional benefits when you select it, and it will give you more as you level up. For clerics, it is level 1, and the specialization that I selected was the Tempest domain because it specializes in thunderbolts and lightning, whereas other clerics might be specialized in healing magic, war magic, or even illusions and trickery. Does it mean that I can't heal? No, I just gain benefits on top of what I already can do as a cleric, and any cleric has healing spells. But one of the benefits that I gain at level 1 from my subclass is the ability to wear the heaviest armor and use martial weapons, which are the strongest weapons in the game, as long as we're not talking magical weapons. That means at level 1, when a cleric gets to choose between a warhammer and a mace, I am allowed to take the warhammer because I am proficient with those. Mini side note, even if I was not a Tempest cleric, I would be able to pick up this warhammer because dwarves are always proficient with a warhammer. It's a dwarven thing. But still, in this case, I'm going to sum it up as it being a cleric thing because that is where I'm getting my heavy armor from. I can take the chain mail as opposed to the scale mail or the leather armor because I am a Tempest cleric. There are some other things you can choose from. Usually it's a backup weapon, some adventuring gear. Read into those when you have the time. They're usually more for flavor and utility choices. Clerics also always get a shield and a holy symbol. We need that to practice our magic. Now let's fill in the equipment and get on with the show. Now, so I wrote down the equipment as you can see at the bottom, but of course you want to know how to swing your hammer at the nearest goblin to turn it into a slightly more dead goblin. So what we're going to do here is in the attacks and spellcasting bit, we write down Warhammer. Now we need to define the attack bonus. The attack bonus is a bonus you get to see whether or not you will be hitting said goblin straight in the face. Because a Warhammer is a large, heavy weapon, it is dependent on our strength score. You remember it was +2. I am proficient with a Warhammer, so by now you obviously know that means I get my proficiency bonus, so the Warhammer gets +4. For damage, the Warhammer says that it has a 1d8 as damage, and I can always add my strength bonus to melee weapon damage. Good news about the Warhammer, if you're not using a shield, if you're wielding the Warhammer with 2 hands, you get to do a 1d10. D10 plus 3. That is the versatile trait that a Warhammer has. Not every weapon has this. I also picked up a hand axe, and that's basically the same deal. It's +4, but it is only 1d6 plus 3 damage. It has the advantage of, however, of being a thrown weapon. I can also throw this axe at someone, which I cannot really do with the Warhammer. I could, but it's not going to work that well. Next up, we get to define our Armour Class. Armour Class basically decides how hard it is for other people to hit you with weapons or spells that require an attack roll. In this case, we have to look at the Armour Class provided by our chainmail, which is 16, and we get to add our shield Armour Class to that as long as we're wearing the shield, so that brings us to a grand total of 18. That basically means that a person who is attacking us has to get an attack roll, so D20 plus their bonus, like the one we have for our weapons here, has to be 18 or greater in order to hit us. Quick note about attack rolls. As I said, my Warhammer depends on strength for its attack, which makes sense, it's a heavy weapon. Other weapons will depend on dexterity. I'm looking at bows, crossbows, and some melee weapons that have the finesse property. A finesse weapon like a rapier or a dagger, for example, can use either strength or dexterity when making the attack roll. So that's good to know. If you're making a rogue, you don't have to invest in strength. You can just use dexterity and use finesse weapons, all right? We now have a fully equipped cleric. All that he is missing are his spells, and luckily this is a pretty easy thing to explain. How you select your spells depends on your class. Either you know a number of spells and you can cast any of these spells during the day, or at the start of each day you can select a number of spells from a large list and you can cast those selected spells. The cleric is the second option. He prays to his god to receive magical powers at the start of the day. The amount of spells that I can select is equal to my cleric level plus my wisdom modifier. So Fordin will start out with 4 spells that he can pick up from the level 1 cleric spell list. Other classes have other amounts of spells. Be sure to check the player handbook for these amounts. We also know 3 cantrips. Cantrips are very basic spells that don't use any resources whatsoever. They're always there for you, but their effect is smaller than that of the other spells that you know. Clerics and some other classes also have extra spells available to them depending on their subclass. For the Tempest Cleric, this means that at level 1, I always have Fog Cloud and Thunderwave prepared. They don't count against those 4 spells that I'm allowed to prepare, so I actually get 6 in total. Most spellcasters at level 1 can cast 2 level 1 spells per day, and as I said, an infinite amount of cantrips. But how do you hit with these spells? Well, very simple. Again, 2 options. Spells like Thunderwave require your targets to make a saving throw. You need to define the number they need to roll in order not to get blasted to bits by your Thunderwave. This number is made by adding 8 plus your proficiency and in the cleric's case, your wisdom modifier, so another 3, giving us 13 in total. And you put that number over at the spell DC square on your character sheet, which is right over here. We write 13 here. Some spells like Guiding Bolt also require a spell attack roll, much like a weapon attack roll, and it is calculated in exactly the same way. You take your spellcasting modifier, which is wisdom plus 3, and you add the proficiency bonus, so I got plus 5 on those. Write down your actual spellcasting ability over here. Some spells allow you to add it to your rolls for extra damage or healing. You can also see I wrote down my 3 cantrips and my 6 spells that I have prepared over here. There is more than room enough rather to write down all the spells that you regularly prepare, and then you can indicate by clicking these things or just coloring the dots on your piece of paper which spells you have prepared for today and which you cannot use. And there you are. That is a full character sheet. We are completely done now. You are now ready to go and explore infinite wondrous worlds with your newly created character. Over the course of your adventures, of course, your character will level up. So be sure to check the player's handbook, what you gain when you level up. It's different for each class at each level. Should you have any questions whatsoever about creating a character, leveling up, or just Dungeons and Dragons in general because you're new to it, don't hesitate to ask them down below in the comments. And don't worry, fellow adventurers, I know that I've talked more than enough for today, but I will return with more advice for the newer ones amongst you. I'll help you figure out how this adventuring business works exactly. And that is why we'll meet again next time in the Attic Dungeon.